We are back in the
80450.
afternoon. We will
And then there's another
continue
one that talks about culture.
on
but I
to
think that might be in
the
company policy.
number 2, the reports.
I feel like we had modified this, Kenneth, but I don't know what it is.
Are we just barely on B?
It's still eight.
Oh, we're still on A. My goodness. Okay, superintendent goals spring 2024.
3 minutes.
I think we've
Good
heard
little
enough of you
Santa.
already.
I think so. I feel that way sometimes, right? So I do have some slides. I'm not going to do a handout. I feel like you have enough handouts, and all the director reports pretty much are reflective of my goals anyway. They hear these all the time. There's something I reiterate. I think it's very important. This first one is something that I think that I would hope that any superintendent that would ever be hired in this district would reiterate this over and over and over again. And that's just basically, our students can perform at a level the same as any other students anywhere, whether it's the state or the nation. And that's something I used to say when I was a principal in the school, and I would say it hopefully with as much passion as President Haskey had just a few minutes ago, and we were talking about that other topic, because I think it's something that we should all believe and that we should all make sure our teachers understand. We don't say things like these kids can't. These kids can, because they're as capable, again, as any students across the state and district or the state and the nation. And we do have proof, and that's something that everybody needs to understand. We have reading scores and math scores in our buildings that show that all of our subgroups can do as well as any other subgroups in this state and across the nation. And that's something that everybody needs to understand. The next one. So this is one of those things that we need to work, we need to do better on this one right now. We have good teachers, it's true, okay? But we don't always have the very best applicants applying for positions. And then we end up with teachers who are, for instance, we have teachers who they're in the education classes or just have an alternate licensure. We need to do a better job of our hiring to get the best teachers. And I think that's something we've done, especially with the H-1B that we've had come in recently. I think we do get a lot of good quality teachers with that H-1B process, and we need to do a better job of attracting the best teachers. The other thing is our programs. That's one of the reasons why we've all had the discussion about why is gifted in DART. Why are they in data assessment research technology? There's a really good reason, and that's because I felt like there it could be focused on for enough time where we were at a place where we had no gifted kids identified in elementary schools. We had 0 identified. That's ridiculous. It's horrible. And so that's something we needed to fix. And so we have, and I think we're moving in the right direction. We're not there yet. And I agree with the board members that at some point it probably does need to move, but I think it needs to stay where it's at for the moment because we have so much momentum going and we need to continue on with that momentum. So we need to make sure we do that. Same thing with CTE programs. I think we have with Bond Wilson something that very few people across the state have. But we can, as the board members have mentioned, we can secure more funding through different grants, different grant opportunities to make sure we have CTE programs that rival anybody in the state. We want our kids that are here in CCSD to stay in CCSD. We don't want families going to Farmington. We don't want them to go into Navajo Prep and all the surrounding districts. So that's super important. The next one, the third one. And this is real important. We're here to serve communities. We have 3 different communities. They all have different needs. We had a discussion that was not a public discussion, just for a couple minutes. But basically what that had to do was talking about respect and the different stakeholders we have in the district and how our communities are all a little bit different. The other thing is in central office, I was a principal here for 17 years straight. I saw central office come and go, different people. We were never here enough to serve students and to serve schools. And we're still not doing that enough. we should bend over backwards. Every single directors who's here, every single coordinator that they have should be servicing schools. That should be the focus of anything we do. It's not about our department. It's not about making sure our department has this or we have that. And the directors here, they've heard me say this many times, so hopefully the board members understand that I mean it. We need to do a better job supporting together, and that includes every department, whether it's student services or C&I or ICO or any of the departments that I've mentioned. We need to make sure we work together to service the whole child. Next one. Okay, this is the one I was just talking about a little bit. Again, we have different needs in different communities. We need to make sure each community is taken care of. Something that I've always noticed, there's a little bit of, there's friction sometimes between our communities. There's the communities that we have down south, especially Newcomb and Nashidi, who Newcomb has schools that they've been in for I don't know how many years going out, and they've been told they're going to get new schools. They needed those schools for many, many, many years. And so we need to make sure we're addressing what they need in those communities. And we're going to be seeing a school go up very soon. Is that right, Ms. Thompson? Very, very soon. And again, each school has their own needs and expectations. We just talked for a little while about language and especially culture differences. Culture revitalization is very, very important. Hopefully, we're doing a good job of supporting different cultures. And our support is based on equity. Is that the last one, or is there one more? Again, I want to say thank you to the board members and also all the conversations we've had with the different directors. I thought those were great conversations. And thank you for saying all the things that you did. And I stand for questions from any board members. Didn't make you yawn.
Sorry.
I thought it was okay.
I appreciate your
brevity. Yes.
That too.
I'm glad to hear that. You know, that's something I haven't heard from a superintendent in years, and you know that we need to be all here and focus on students, and you know, it brings to mind, saw a post complaining about the district being open for on the eclipse day, and saying that, you know, that other places had their day off or whatever. To me, I think what you exactly said, we're here for the students. And if this is a day of teaching and guiding our students to observe that day in the correct way under guidance of ICO, or then we should do that. And but we're not forcing all students to school either. You know, it's really their choice. And but I really appreciate your words. Thank you. Any other questions, board members?
I have nothing.
Any comments, questions?
Not at this time.
So we'll go on to item B, performance-based budgeting.
Okay, so I'll try and be
Sorry, what? Brief? Yes, I'll try and be brief.
I'm being impeded now.
Although it is really important, so. Don't be too quick.
So, I'll go through the presentation and then I'll go through my thoughts, because I think that's how it's laid out in here. But basically what performance-based budgeting is it's or PBB is a budgeting approach where funding decisions are based on achieving specific measurable programs, projects, or activities according to their product's effectiveness and efficiency. And then a performance-based budget focuses on outcomes and results rather than just input costs. For instance, in education, instead of allocating funds for textbooks, a performance-based budget may allocate resources based on improvements in student test scores or graduation rates. And this approach encourages efficiency and accountability by linking funding to measurable achievements. And so that's the basics of what performance-based budgeting is. And then when we look at performance-based budgeting, what should we be considering? And one is the strategic plan, making sure we establish a clear vision and mission, including long-term goals, and a roadmap for achieving them. And then we need to prioritize our programs, allocating resources based on performance and impact, and then data-driven decisions using data to inform budget adjustments and resource allocation. And then regular evaluation, assessing program effectiveness regularly to adapt budgets accordingly. And then strategic investments, meaning direct funds towards initiatives with the highest potential for positive impact. And then the outcome metrics would be aligning budgets with specific measurable outcomes. And that's what we should be considering when we do that. When you go through performance-based budgeting, these are the steps from what I could find everywhere that I did the research is, formulation of the objectives, identifying various processes and plans, evaluation and selection of the process and plans, then development of the performance criteria, the financial planning, the correcting of the deviations, and then the assessing of performance. Here's a sample of a performance-based budget. And this approach encourages schools to focus on achieving specific measurable goals and ensures that funding aligns with the desired outcomes in education. And so with it, you would have the objective of improving student achievement. So you would allocate funds based on measurable outcomes such as standardized test scores, graduation rates, and academic performance. And then you would look at key performance indicators, or your KPIs, which would be your test scores for improvement, allocating additional resources to schools that demonstrate significant improvements in student test scores, your graduation rates, reward schools with higher graduation rates, providing additional funding to support programs contributing to student retention, and then 3, teacher training and development, allocating funds for professional development programs for teachers, linking the budget to improvements in teaching quality and student engagement. Then you'd have to have technology integration, the budget allocation, tie the budget allocation to schools successfully implementing technology in the classrooms, because it could be one that's measured by enhanced student learning experience and outcomes. And then community engagement would be allocating resources to schools that actively involve parents and the community in educational initiatives, fostering a positive environment for student success.
Question. Under community engagement, I don't want to get too involved, just a simple answer. Does that include the PACs, parent advisory committees? Is that where some of that money would go to, as an example?
I don't know, we'd have to look at that and see all that. I'm just kind of giving the framework because I haven't done all of that research, so I just wanted to present
That's
what
fine.
it would look like. And then I'll go over where I think we need to go from there. Okay, so, and then special education support, allocating additional funds to schools, effectively supporting students with special needs, ensuring inclusivity and improved outcomes for these students, and then extracurricular programs. Link budget allocation to schools offering diverse extracurricular activities, promoting a well-rounded education, and contributing to overall student development. This is just an example. Ours would be whatever we want to make it and how we want to make it. But then I want to go into the challenges and disadvantages of performance-based budgeting, and then I'll go more deep into the different types of budgeting approaches. And so, in the private sector, that's where mostly performance-based budgeting is used. It's not used so much in education because education is more pushing towards equity, that kind of stuff. So it makes it a little difficult to decide what kind of performance indicators are we going to do when we're being told we have to be equitable and that kind of stuff. So there's a challenge there. So in the private sector, it's used for like linking bonuses to achievement, and we can't do that in education. It's typically used for streamlining production lines, quality control. Implementing PBB can be challenging due to data collection and difficulty in goal alignment and measuring of performance. Sometimes there's not that straight, you do get some improvements, but you might not see other improvements because sometimes it's not all just data driven. Time and resource intensive process. It can be resource intensive as it requires frequent data collection, analysis, and performance evaluations in addition to standard budgeting and finance practices. And then it's a competitive-based budget model in an educational setting, again, that requires equity. So those are some of the challenges that I came up with. And then in the end, the mind shift. It's very interesting and it's a challenging concept that if we were to do it, we would probably need like a modified approach, and what would that look like? And so that's where I left it, is where do we go from here? And so overall, that's performance-based budgeting. But one of the things that we have to do as in education is there are several types of budgeting. One is account code line item budgeting, which we already have to do. So we've got to go specific to line items. Then we've got site-based budgeting, where we've got to meet the site-based requirements of, is everybody getting their site specific, and are we being equitable? So that comes into play. And then this performance-based budgeting, if we want to kind of do some of this with all of the other, how would we do that? And so those are the questions we have to come up with. And I think we would really need to study this, figure out with our strategic plan, what are we going to achieve and how are we going to do it? Like, are we going to focus on student improvement and how? And then the other one is zero-based budgeting. And I think that's basically what that does, is it takes the departments all the way down to zero, and you have to be able to you present your budget to a group or to all of us to make sure that it meets the needs. And so I think we need to use a combination of all of them to get to performance-based budgeting, because I really think that with zero-based budgeting, we'll identify where our overlaps are. We'll identify where we've got duplication, where we could be doing some things better and do things a little bit different. So that's my understanding of performance-based budgeting, and I think we've got a lot of work to do to get us there, and I think it's going to take some time because we've also got challenges where we're at right now.
So you prefer using a combination of?
I think it would have to be a combination of everything, because we're required to do account code line items. We're required to do site-based budgeting. So I think it's just going to have to be a combination of all and not just be performance-based.
Board President. So one of my concerns is that the Legislative Finance Committee and the legislature in House Bill 2 is requiring us to move to performance-based budgeting. They've been talking about this for the last 3 years in every single one of their committees, and the language is now in House Bill 2. So my concern is that we need to figure out how we are going to transition so that we can show them we are doing that, especially because they're linking it to Yasi Martinez. And there was that one Senate Finance Committee, or actually it was during the interim, where Senator Munoz, and you were there, that was your first meeting, right? Where Senator Munoz said, well, maybe we should start looking at the school districts for not complying with these findings
He
and
didn't say looking
showing.
at school, he said suing
I know,
school
I was trying to be
districts.
nice.
Yep.
Trying to not be combative, just kidding. And so we have had this conversation in little teeny bite-sized pieces. But, and I know Ped's put some stuff out on this as well. And so, anyway, that's the background for where we are with performance-based budgeting from a state standpoint and that requirement. It's now a requirement.
Well, I actually talked to Sarah Cordova, who's the head of it, and she basically said nothing's moving forward on it yet. They don't even know the direction it needs to go. But we do need to.
Who is Sarah Cordova?
She's the head of finance.
For PED or for
PED,
LFC?
For PED.
So that would be executive and legislative speaking of a requirement.
Right, no, I know. But for us moving forward, I still think we're gonna have to go, if that's the case. But I think it's always gonna be a combined model. I don't think that you can go to a true performance-based budgeting model because even the states that are doing it, it's very difficult to do it. I know that the LFC is doing their allocations that way. That's why we have they're looking at, well, not really, I wouldn't say that, I could say that, I'll back up on that. I do know that they're looking at a lot of their funding is based on student data, equity, that kind of stuff. And so how we're gonna have to make it work, I'm not sure. I think it's gonna be a big, like, that's why I said, I don't know where we go from here. How do we move it and where do we go? So I think it's just gonna be waiting for some guidance from them and then going from there. But I do think it's gonna still include the combination of all of them to get to there. And that's what we're doing right now, to some extent.
Okay. Board members, any questions? Are we gonna go with this?
So
Okay, so I guess clarification if it's required or not.
it's required. Just because PED hasn't given us direction on how to do it yet doesn't mean it's not. So I guess what I would say from that standpoint is performance-based budgeting isn't gonna just magically disappear from House Bill 2 or Legislative Finance Committee's rubric, right? They've been at it for 3 years. So I guess I don't want us to be in that spot where we're not showing we're moving forward on that because we're one of the school districts they go back to every single year for are we complying or not, right? And I guess my question would be how do we start, to Carol's point, how do we start looking at that to see how we can start incorporating it? What do we need? What are those basic questions? How do we reorient ourselves to that? What kind of data do we need from data to help us in that so that we're not just kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard in the dark? Oops, I didn't mean to make that pun for dart.
Oh.
That's funny. Wow, that's a double meaning. Awesome. I just want us to stay ahead of or try to stay ahead of the game. They like picking on us, they like focusing on us, and I sure would like to be able to say to them, hey, we're doing everything in our power, even given the challenges that Carol brought up, to comply with what you're asking.
Yep. So I can meet with, if it's LFC, I don't have a contact there. If it's LESC.
Sunny Liu is probably the best person to talk with about it there.
So I can talk to him about it. I do have my email where I asked her regarding any performance-based budgeting, and she just referred me back to the PSAB, which talks about it in general. And so I'm not sure that, like I said, that they've gone to that area yet, but I will get in touch with all of them. I do know Sunny. I will talk with him. I'll talk with Danielle. I'll talk to Gwen Warnament and John Senna.
Yep.
And see where are they going with that, because in everything I've gone to, I haven't seen any of that. But I did reach out to Sarah, who is at the head at PD. I'll also talk to them as well and see where do we need to go in order to move that way, because I didn't find anything on that. But do we, I think we need the goals and what we're trying to achieve, because I think we need that for any type of budgeting. Because I think that we all need to be reaching for what is it that is the number one goal. Is it student achievement in numbers, in performance? Is it graduation rates? It's probably all of those things, but what is it that we're trying to achieve?
Well, the biggest thing, if I could jump in on that, would be bridging gaps, right, with Yazzie Martinez. And so the language of the court case specifically talks about gaps. So what we've said in the past before you got here, Carol, was how do we identify gaps? We identify gaps through data, and that's partly why data was created. And then how do we achieve, and this is an ongoing conversation at the legislature for the past, I want to say 4 or 5 years now, right? Especially with even an impact aid, was how do we, okay, you've identified gaps, you've identified programs to address those gaps. Which programs are working and which programs aren't working in identifying and addressing those gaps? And so from a performance, the way that I've heard it discussed, Carol, from a legislative standpoint, which is both LFC and LESC, was that they want to make sure that we are spending our money appropriately, because they accuse us of not spending our money on the right programs. And so we need a tool to be able to show them not only are we really focusing and prioritizing our funds on the right programs, but here's the proof.
Well, if I can add to that, what you just said, Jermaine, even with what she has here under challenges and disadvantages of performance-based budgeting, you take that first bullet point, and the private sector is used for employee performance, i.e. linking bonuses to achievement. However, in education, we cannot, in respects to the comments you just made about underperforming or those that are above, and equitably distributing that funding. That's the perspective that they're coming from, especially in light of Yazzie Martinez, when they're pumping all that money into the educational system and wanting to see a return on the investment. That's really where it's coming from.
Right.
And to the point of me saying that earlier in the conversation, of being called and carpet and chastised, to what she said about what we're doing or what we're not doing. So when you look at it from that perspective of performance-based budgeting, you actually could take some of that language and flip it and apply it in a manner that is absolutely applicable to what we do in education. In the same way, it's just not a high-performing employee in the private sector, okay, here comes a bonus.
Right.
Well, the key word in this that I see is equitably to be able to get those return on investments and achieve a high student outcome in those gapped areas. So you really could, in my humble opinion, do that and take that by utilizing even some of the other principles from the other ones, baseline budgeting and zero-based budgeting, and still apply it and make it work.
Right. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be,
Before you go any further, can you, I want to hear this from Gary, but can you explain what this is, performance-based?
Again, the analogy I threw out is you're at Home Depot, and they don't like talking about it. The reason I know that because I used to work there. They had incentive pay bonuses.
Okay.
You have a department supervisors just knocking it out. Well, they would have an incentive pay to incentivize you to do more, do better, but they didn't like talking about it. So the better you perform, the more you get in bonuses. We don't do that in education. We can't do that in education. So what I did is to equate either underperforming or highly performing schools or districts, in this case CCSD, okay? And then you take that funding that we're getting, that where they pumped in all that money into Yazzie Martinez, okay? And they even brought up Impact Aid with us. You're getting all this money now, you're getting 100%. Remember that part of that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
So we expect greater student outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't take and bonus a school. So what we do is we have to equitably distribute all that money that we're getting across the board to fill in the gaps that she's talking about, okay? And how do you do that? Well, using the other two principles that she's talking about, baseline budgeting or zero-based budgeting, using some of those principles and incorporating that into performance-based budgeting to equitably distribute that funding in those areas that the entirety of the community, the board, the superintendent, the directors, and the principals, because it's the schools that are being directly impacted, to take that funding and put it where it needs to be so we can fill in those gaps. Again, you're not focusing on just a high-performing school or employee that gets that bonus. Did I get a little bit more clear, or did I muddy it?
Yeah, but I guess yeah, you did, but it just confirms my thoughts in it, that first of all, I go back to where LSFC has put us on the last day, the last couple minutes, and so why?
Well, because they control the purse strings. And because they control the purse strings, they feel that they have the ability and the need to tell you how to do it and how to expend those funds. But we already know that. We understand that. He understands that. One, not just as a principal, but as a superintendent. Directors should understand that, and so should the principals.
Because to me, in their shoes, thinking, oh, this one's gonna get it, I think it adds up to.
I guess the way I look at it is we have a finite amount of money, right? I look at it as we have a finite amount of money, right? The conversation about the kinds of programs we implement. Like at one point we had 30 or 40 programs, right? And so you start asking yourself, okay, so I have this amount of money to throw at or to fund different programs that are supposed to help. And if we are splitting that pot in 40 programs, we might not be very effective because that money is spread out too thin for all of those programs. What are the top programs that are really helping kids? And you have the data to show that when this program was implemented, whatever program you want to call it, intervention, for example, reading intervention, right? And the way that this one was done, at one point we did PACS quite a bit, right? At what point how many kiddos really responded well, meaning their gaps started closing, and you can I'm not Leandro, so he's going to be better at this than me, but performance indicators like the testing, but it's not just testing, it's other areas, behavioral patterns, all sorts of things. At what point, like if we put more money into this program where kids are really responding, we might get more benefit, meaning more kids respond by those gaps closing. That's how I listen, or that's kind of how I understand what they mean by performance-based budgeting is we only have a limited amount of money. How are you guys going to show us that you're putting that to its best use so that it gets to kids fastest? That's how I look at it. I mean, I understand the salary side of it, but from the legislative policy side and the Yazzie Martinez and the programmatic standpoint, that's how I think they're trying to help us understand it.
Well, from the legislative side, there's a real big disconnect. And that's your playground. How do you feel about this, Superintendent?
I'm glad you asked. I don't know if there's anybody sitting here that was here 10 years ago as I don't know what position Mr. Montoya was in. We had a previous superintendent that went through a performance-based budgeting process. I believe you were here for that, Cookie. And through this process, here's the problem that we all faced. The PED gives you the SEG, they just give you so much money to operate, let's say, your elementary schools, there's a program, and then operate your secondary schools, and then operate your maintenance and operations. They only give you X amount of dollars for each of them, and it's based on per pupil expenditures. So here's your pot of money, how are you gonna spend it? And there's not much deviation you can do, it's just that much. So it's not so much based on, okay, when we're talking about performance, everybody gets the same. Now, so what they do then is they supplement that. And they say, for years they were giving money for schools who were performing well, they were getting extra. So that was one way they were doing it. Now they decided, well, let's give money to those students or those schools that are underperforming. And so some of the monies that they gave, some of the chunks of money were above the line, so it was allocated evenly. Some of it was below the line, and so it just sort of went here, sort of went there. So when the PED is going to say that we're doing performance-based budgeting, I agree with Carol that they have things they have to clean up, because they need to decide how are they going to base performance of districts so that we can allocate the funding, so then the district can take that funding and do their own performance-based procedures. Because like Jermaine was saying, okay, there's test scores, that's one thing that I talked about. But then there's a lot of soft data. For instance, we want to make sure we're adhering to cultural expectations. So where does that funding go? How do we get that funding? Where does that come from? What's the performance of that? Well, it's based on, this is the needs of our communities. So we're doing surveys, we're taking a dipstick of what's important in our communities, and hopefully having a strategic plan that points us in that direction. But I think there's so much more to do before, like Carol said, before you can really implement.
And I feel like this is, they don't have enough guts to make that determination, so they throw it back this way and they say,
Exactly
you do
right.
it.
That's exactly right.
It's absolutely, yep.
And they also don't have any understanding of on the ground what it takes to actually do that. So remember, the very first year of Yazzie Martinez, they threw a ton of money out there, right?
$400 million.
And the one example I always go back to is the after school, summer school thing. Remember, they put a ton of money out there. Nobody took it because on the ground, it was impossible. I think the requirement they had was that if you were gonna get this extra money, the teacher that the kids had in this calendar year would have to follow them through the summer. Impossible. And to your point,
That's an excellent example, because there was a whole lot of pushback across the state about that.
I'm a skeptic. My idea is that the state, with throwing out all of this money and then say, all right, now you prove that that you're doing what's expected, it's an excuse for them to look and say, how can we take it back?
that's another one.
I don't have
You said that too.
credibility in politicians, especially at the state level. They have had 75% of the money that was allocated for the school districts. And it stung like heck when they had to give it up. And I think that more than anything else, they're looking for some way to get their hands back on it. That's my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I think you're probably more than, I think you're correct on that. So,
We said that initially when
Yeah.
they first gave that back, or when they gave that 100%, we said,
So how are they gonna follow?
how can we
How are they
protect
gonna do
them reaching back and taking it back?
And we have Carol, who's like our awesome person that's on that committee, because the way they're gonna do that is the redefinition of the SEG. And so like you're our warrior on the front lines there to make sure they don't mess with us.
I just wanted to share also that one good example of performance-based budgeting is what we did 7 years ago, 6-7 years ago, when teachers are given incentives if they are effective or exemplary. So, but there are other factors that affects, their evaluation or the outcome of their evaluation, not just the principal's observation, but also student test scores. They use the value-added model. They use the attendance. They use performance growth of students over the years. And I think the last one that they use is the survey, the community survey. So given that, and I know during that time the board has not or had not been a proponent or a good supporter of that, because there's some prejudice, some inequity that goes to that kind of budgeting or giving incentives to the teachers. It's just too hard unless, again, on the statistics side, if there's a really kind of like the margin of error is very, very slim or
Qualified you, I mean, there was just, it's hard to, I think that's gonna be the hardest part, is identifying what is it that we're looking at. That's the hardest part.
And our secret sauce there is Mr. Leandro and data. If we can figure that out, how do we collect the data? How do we input it in a quality way? That's the secret sauce.
it takes time and it takes
A lot of effort, yeah, and I don't know that we have this is gonna take, if we think we're having to analyze right now, this is gonna take way more analysis. I mean, you're gonna be getting in weeds, you're gonna be digging and pulling and saying, this works, this doesn't, and
It almost needs an outside consultant.
yeah, I think it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be tough,
It can be done.
but it can be done. But I think it would need to be like a mesh. I don't know that it's gonna be ever 100% performance-based.
It's kind of like a subtle way to cause division. That's what I look at, how I look at it. And this is
Carol, you're a
A
terrible
sly-
teacher, but Keandra, you're amazing. No.
a sly way of doing things, and
No, it's hard. This is to me, this has always been a hard, because it's been in our manual for a long time, but how do you make it happen? There's so much subjectivity. There's so much, not everything's driven by 100% numbers, because what may seem like performance in one area is not performance in another area. It's just hard. I don't know.
because if they thought money was a factor, such as the bonuses, incentives, and things like that, then how come only 6% raise?
District of Columbia, I think, is
3%.
talking about giving $100,000.
But we have a
Teachers.
boom in oil and gas.
What they want to do with it.
Well, that's all I have. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think we've got to figure out next steps. That's why I just said, where do we go from here? Because I don't know.
To Ms. Aspas's point, it's like they're taking away for my department when they forgave the offsets of all the school districts. because they thought we had all this money and they forgave all those offsets. Now in construction, they're penalizing us. We have our impact aid 100%, but how are we now going to still try to keep up when you forgave Albuquerque schools $14 million in offsets?
To talk about Los Alamos too.
And Los Alamos just got $24 million waiver because of the construction projects
And
that
they're-
got caught in
They're the richest school
And-
district.
That's what we're just, yeah.
inflation and everything, and they ran out of money and had to ask for a waiver. So it's a game that they play all the time. And it sometimes gets very tiring of trying to play it, because it's chess. It's not checkers,
It's just.
it's chess.
I agree with that.
Well, April 12th is a town hall meeting from,
Yes.
I thought you was gonna say April Fools and then.
Well, yes.
No.
I know. I thought she was gonna say that. I was waiting for it. Yeah, I think we just have to do the best we can to safeguard the district, because we are always targeted for one thing or another. I mean, it's ridiculous. Just crazy. So.
I wonder if maybe we raise that on that task force when they're looking at the SEG formulation, because it's tied in together. I mean, that's coming from LFC, that's coming from LESC, and the LESC that's the LESC task force. So might be a good place to raise it. Sorry, I was gonna say might not be a bad idea, and I mixed them up.
well, and then from the ASBO, they were talking about transportation too. The game, I guess, the games they're playing over there, and that's another area.
It's a huge area. So on that area, they're trying to take out the density in the formula. Are you aware of this one, Carol? They're trying to take the density calculation out of the transportation formula. What that means is rural school districts are way more expensive to serve from a transportation standpoint than urban districts. But they're literally saying we should just treat it as if that doesn't matter. Like that there's not a density
All
issue.
the same.
And then so in House Bill 2, they allocated some money to kind of like hold it harmless, essentially, by taking that density factor out. But there's no way that's going to hold it harmless. And so again, you have these formulas that on paper they balance out because they want them to balance out, but in reality, on the ground, they do not balance out, and they will end up costing us. It is another way of, to your point, Board Secretary, is making us pay extra without the transparency if that's actually what they're doing.
They already do that with our buses by making us run our buses as long as we do, and our buses don't run under the same conditions as an Albuquerque or Las Cruces or Santa Fe bus. The dirt roads, just the unimprovements that our buses run on every single day, but we have to make our buses last until it's time for them to be replaced.
I still want us to do a GoPro on one of our Newcomb buses, just to show them what those buses go through in bad weather, for example. When you have floods that they're literally going through a lake to get through.
Why GoPro? Why don't you just stick the governor on there?
We've had a couple of her people ride our buses.
Remember they came one year?
They came one year and
And we got 2 buses.
they went out to Newcomb and rode 2 buses out there.
Didn't they give us buses after that?
No.
Still have the same, what, they're 12 years running,
12 years.
20 years life. So regardless if you're in city or you're in, like you said, dirt roads, so.
Well, it's not even dirt roads. I mean, we're like talking rugged washboard, clay, rut, yeah.
Isn't she coming? Isn't she coming to the district?
That's what our vice president
That's what it
just said.
says, town hall.
Scotland.
April 12th.
Tour.
She's bringing 27 members of her cabinet with her.
For a bus.
Governor.
I'm very interested in the reason why, but I don't know what that is.
Yes.
Speculating.
Little campaign for me.
I was told she is bringing her cabinet to help the community members with all the services that the state is providing them.
Or not providing.
And she didn't really want it publicized that she may be here or not be here,
Or not.
or not.
Or not is probably awkward.
So in other words, she
Because
might
she
be here, but if
doesn't
it's
wanna have to
publicized,
deal
she's
with-
not gonna be here.
Protest situation.
Who's gonna protest? If she's doing great things.
All right.
Paul Harvey, the rest of the story.
So, are there any other comments? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next item. Types of grants for our school district.
Part two.
The rest of the story.
I was good in my timing then, huh?
I know. Bellamy,
Yes, ma'am.
how long
It
is,
shouldn't take long.
okay,
She's done.
I think we did quite a bit.
I think, yeah,
We kind of did, you're right, I think we kind of did talk
We
about
did, we
Yeah.
talked quite a
the
bit.
needs
There were just
to,
a few questions, I think, on the rest of the grants
okay.
that I wasn't fully informed.
Harvey us.
Right.
Okay.
So we can show you the next slide. So what I did was I broke down from what I can see in OBMS of the grants that we have. I don't see impact aid, if that, component of the grant, so that's not indicated on here. And I broke down the grants by where they're located. So we have some grants that sit at the high school level with principals. They are the program managers, our CTE, Carl Perkins Secondary, and Carl Perkins. And that is primarily Mr. Barola. Federal programs, I shared that component in my presentation. Food services, we have a couple of grants in there. Our homeless, we have community schools, Indian Ed, bilingual, Indian Ed Act, JOM, those are all sitting in ICO. Instructional supports, this is one that Mr. Dustwood shared, the Open Science Ed, so that's just now coming in. We'll probably end up landing in CNI. Family Index, that one sits at the school level, so that's our, what they call the F2 money, and that's usually allocated at PED, and they tell us what we get based on Family Income Index. We also receive instructional materials that comes into CNI, but that is down at the school level, so it's already divvied out with whatever materials are necessary at the schools. SSO has IDEA, pre-K, stay in school sped, and then the transportation, school buses and school bus cameras. So overall, without including ESSERS, since that one was rolling out and it's already spent, I did not include that in this component of what it looks like. These would be grants that we could apply for again, looking into the next round, whether it's next year. Some of the grants are a 2-year grant, but they will continue through next COPAD. Let me change the slide there, Ms. Sharon. And so the question of what did we not apply for, or what are we going to apply for, what does our future look like? We already discussed 21st century. Now, in the realms of 21st century, we actually were able to recoup from that. So 21st century, we were awarded right at $560,000 for 5 years. We received that amount every year for the 5 years. And then when we were up for renewal, of course, we know the story there, but in turn, we were able to apply for the OST, which is the out of school time grant.
That one was a competitive grant and was a really awesome success for CCSD. We had to compete with schools. It wasn't a give me grant like some of these others are through New Mexico PED. And we were the highest funded in the state, $1.9 million.
So would that have been complementary to the 21st Century Grant, or is it either or?
It would have been either or, because what we were applying for, had it passed through and been uploaded in time, was 1.4 million. We were looking at it being K-12. So, and that was even feedback from PED when they came out to visit. At that time, we only had 6 of our 8 elementary schools. And they said, why aren't you doing more? We have more funds. So we waited for that window to open, we doubled the grant, and we were going big. So we went big the second time with OST, and we were funded. So that was wonderful. The OST grant, the out-of-school time, so it's Nita Lowey HB2 bill. And it gets confusing with OOST, which is a different component of funds, but this is OST, out-of-school time, Nita Lowey. That one is a renewal grant, so we look to reapply for that as well. We won't have to go through the formal application process. We will just indicate our numbers and request that we're refunded the next round. So, since we've done most of the leg work. The others that we didn't apply for that came through this year was calming rooms. That would have been $25,000 for each school. That's what that grant was for. We ended up using our Title IV money and Title I for social emotional learning. So we still were able to recoup those funds that we would have. But as you're sharing the question you had, we would have been able to move the money in a different way had we received the grant. So however you want to look at it. There was a Native American teachers grant that we did not apply for. Again, we were at the benefit of that. San Juan College applied for it, and now they're working with us, wanting to work with us through the HARP program. So the ones we didn't apply for, we didn't lose, in a sense. We just reallocated our funds that we currently had. The present, right now, we're working on researching the Renew America Energy Grant. This is the potential of $50 million to come into our district to support HVAC and energy focused. Ms. Thompson, myself, Mr. Carlson, and Ms. Gonzalez, we've been on communication path researching this. It just opened up as well with New Mexico PED, so we received, as we were sharing, Mr. Carlson shares information out, where are we at, what's here. So it just came out yesterday, and it would be June 13th. So we are still doing our research to then come to the school board meeting and share the details of that grant to see if that is something we want to do. Because there are some, as we've heard here so far, there are some sides that we need to take into account. And we can go into more detail later on that. But that's a possibility. That will be very highly competitive. It's through Department of Energy. And then in the future, Title IV had just shared at New Mexico last week that they have some safe and healthy schools, wellness, attendance, bullying focused funds that will be coming out. She had mentioned she doesn't have the information last week or the week before when we were just there. So we're waiting for that to come, and I'm looking to move that. We'll partner, of course, with SSO, ICO, all of the programs that focus in the student wellness, attendance, and bullying components of their departments. So within that, that would then free up funds in Title I and Title IV, because that's usually the area of those two grants that focus in those components. So that is the only thing right now on the radar that's open for us to apply for, unless we go out into private industry, as Dr. Lopez Martinez shared with the Kellogg Foundation, some of the others that are out there that we can look at.
Is the Carl Perkins still the only one Bon Wilson is using?
3. So
There's 3.
they have a CTE grant, they have a secondary Carl Perkins, and then they have Carl Perkins General, and then Next Gen also, Leandro? I'm thinking Next Gen as well.
It's the CTE for state.
Okay.
CTE Next Generation.
So those are the ones that Ron Wilson usually runs for, that we support him. Leandro and I have been on the team to write for this last component. And at that point, we were small. We were smaller. It was during COVID. So now when it opens up, we can definitely expand. We can look at expanding to Shiprock area, to Newcomb area, because that grant allowed for different locations of funds. It didn't have to stay in one location.
And I the last time I asked about is, I know that at that time, Von Wilson, that was the only one they had. And then along, we're just fortunate that NTU decided to, you know, be on the other side of the building. And so that's what sustained it. And, but I just, you know, I keep asking about those balances or what comes in on those particular grants because they are important.
Right. And right now, the only grants that could support CTE focus are Title IV and Title I. And Title I, 85% is at the school. So that's a matrix that we send right down. We don't keep that at the district level. So, and you know, we encourage then the schools to be able to look at what are their needs, their plans, and that's why, you know, the performance driven, but also the plan driven, we really are working hard for them to identify in their root cause analysis, what do you need? You know, if you're needing technology, then make sure it's in your 90-day plan. Don't forget anything, any piece of the action that will get you where you need to be, that will show student gaps closing and increasing within the data. So sometimes those are forgotten. You know, they think, oh, we just need this one thing, and you might need 30 different things to get there. So make sure you include them. At our academic planning meetings, we've been looking at the ED plan. So we have a district education plan that we submit so that we have layers of plans in place. That if a 90-day plan was not sufficient, for some reason, maybe a school didn't identify technology, you know, as their need, we can go into a district ed plan and show that that's a need. So there's levels of plans from what the state looks at, a district strategic plan, then into an education plan, then into school 90-day plans, then into a principal CDP, their plan, and then in a teacher's plan. So if teachers have identified, this is my pathway, I'm an alternative licensure teacher, I'm just getting started, you know, we don't want to flood them with Title II, you've got to go to all these trainings when really they need to get their level 1 finished. That's the first thing they need to be focused on. So Ms. Amron has been working with us in CNI to develop what could be potential teacher pathways so that they're not overwhelmed and wanting to quit after 2 years. You know, they come in from alternative licensure and, ooh, this is too much, can't do this, I'm out of here. We want them to stay with us. We want them to continue growing. So without feeling so overwhelmed. And we know it's a lot what they have to be able to know just hitting the ground with students first day one. So we've been working with San Juan College on that aspect. There are several of our departments that are there within that team in the San Juan County Advisory Team with San Juan College, and we're developing that as a whole San Juan County. So that's pretty much it for me.
Okay.
And it's just whatever comes my way, everything from prior. If we can get a process going, then this will help because then we know how to get that moving faster than bumping into each other in the dark.
Okay. Well, with previous conversations, we'll have more conversations in regards to your program.
Sure.
All right.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's it.
Thank you.
That's great. Is that the last slide? I think it's the last slide. Thank you.
Yeah, the next one's thank you.
Just making sure.
Okay, FTE report.
Bellamy.
Yes, ma'am.
We're applying for the beautiful grant for $30,000.
Yeah, I'll give it back to you.
do we discuss this again?
I think before we had sort of a specific conversation, and I think what Leonard's gonna do now is an overview of the process. Would be my guess.
So, if I can start, President Husky. So basically, I started with the requirement, the New Mexico statutes on how our public schools, school personnel, staffing patterns, and class load teaching loads that is required in compliance with the said New Mexico statute 22, Chapter 22, Article 10A, Section 22-10A-10. So if you can look at the next slide, the individual class load for elementary school teachers shall not exceed 20 students per kindergarten, provided that any teacher in the kindergarten with class load of 15 to 20 shall be provided with an educational assistant. The average class load for elementary school teachers at an individual school shall not exceed 22 students when average among grades 1, 2, and 3, provided that any teacher in grade 1 with a class load of 21 or more shall be entitled to a full-time assistance of an educational assistant. For grades 4, 5, and 6, the average class load for elementary school teacher shall not exceed to 24 students. The daily teaching load for teachers from grades 7 through 12, which are our high schools and middle schools, shall not exceed 160 students, except for the daily teaching load for teachers of required English courses in grades 7 and 8 shall not exceed 135, with a maximum of 127 students per class, or 27 per class. And daily teaching load for teachers of required English courses in grades 9 through 12 shall not exceed 150 students, with a maximum of 30 students per class. Class loads for music electives and band or athletic electives is not covered by this requirement. And at the end, third page, the State of Secretary of Education may waive the individual school class load requirements established in this section. Waiver shall be applied for annually, and a waiver shall not be granted for more than 2 consecutive years. And waivers may only be granted if the following school district demonstrates: no portable classroom are available, no other available resources of funding exist to meet the need of additional classrooms, the school district is planning on alternatives to increase building capacity for implementation within 1 year, and the parents are involved or aware of the waiver of the statutory requirements for class loads. Of course, each district shall report the department the size and composition of classes subsequent to 40th day of December 1 count, which is, we usually do 40th, 80th, and 120th day. So those, as I said earlier today, the count days are important in order for the New Mexico Public Education to, do their task to basically tell this district if they are within the requirement of the statutes. Failure to meet class load requirements within 2 years shall be justification for the disapproval of school district's budget by the State Secretary of Education. And then the department shall report to the LESC by November 30th of each year regarding each school district's ability to meet the class load requirements imposed by the law. So you can also see on the slide where the trend of our enrollment, you can see that there's a declining enrollment in the district, and currently we are at 4,696 students. So 5 years ago, we were about 5,550 school year 2019-2020, which is, pre-pandemic. And of course, with all the movements that we have in the school district, closure of our generating stations, those are all kind of like a ripple effect of what had happened in the past couple of years. So the next slide will tell us, or kind of like giving you a general overview of how the FTE review. The FTE are scheduled in the fall. Recommendations are within the 20th and 40th days of school, which kind of like in line with the statutory requirements of NMPED to report to LESC. And of course, the spring before the third quarter ends. So it's strategically scheduled within those days so that any movements or any things that we need to do, example, reduction or new positions that will be involved. Say, for example, at the beginning of the year, students will not be affected so much with the changes of their schedule or having a new teachers within the school. School and community needs, this is what I say about the elective classes where it is based on student pathways, interests, and needs. And of course, ultimately, what are the students' IEP or their GIEP would need to require in order for us to be responding to the needs of the students. The principals will complete the FTE form, and I gave you an example. Basically, all the students are listed, how many teachers are listed of each of the teachers, and we divided it, and we will come up with ratio and average class sizes for each of the schools. This is an example for high school. It's a little bit different with elementary. Elementary is by grade level, where teachers are regarded as their homeroom teachers, with the exception of EBA B, where we have the immersion class, and of course at Newcomb Elementary. We also have a summary of what we have currently for the FTE, and I would like to give a shout out to Tanya for providing this spreadsheet from iVision, getting our pivot table, getting our FTE by CCSD. So currently we have 765 FTE through the schools. 8 are in process of getting onboarded, and then 25 are in vacant positions. So there's a total of 798 current in process and vacant FTE throughout the school districts, minus the SAO and SAO staff. There is a breakdown of each of the current FTE in process and vacant for each of the schools. You can take a look. I break it down through elementary, middle school, and high school as well. And then the last page of the PowerPoint is the summary of FTE by the offices in the administration that composed of the superintendent, CNI, data and assessment, ICO, student support, business services, food services, HR, IT, maintenance, transportation, and warehouse. You can see that I put a kind of like a disclaimer at the bottom. Student support services has almost a total of 60 FTE, but it includes bus drivers and aides, clerical, liaison, confidential and support staff, and related services which are all members of student support services. And then lastly, Google Docs that I provided is a current average class size for each of the elementary school. You can see the breakdown of each grade band based on the statutory requirements for each of the districts. Kindergarten band, grades 1 to 3, and grades 4 to 6. And I'm looking at the documents. And with my 7 years of doing the FTE and data reporting for Central Consolidated, we have never submitted a waiver to NMPED where we violated the statutory requirements for class loads. But we're always actually below the class sizes that we have required to report. Do you have any questions? It's time for questions.
Any questions?
Just a comment.
Sure.
I know across the state, across the country, they're always talking about class sizes and optimal class sizes. And I just did an average across the board as an aggregate for kindergarten. The average class size between all the elementary schools is 13.54 for kindergarten. Grades 1 through 3, 14.72. Grades 4 through 6, 17.05, which under these circumstances, and we'll look at student outcome and achievement, I think we're getting, if we're not, superintendent, at what some would consider optimal numbers in some people's opinions, right?
Sure.
So therefore, that should be optimal and improved outcomes. Those class
I would
sizes,
think, yes.
you would think.
It's one of the things that Mr. Venturini just stated was that we've never gone, I don't even know if we've come close to submitting a waiver.
The labor.
I can remember 12 years ago to maybe 17, 18 years ago, that was a common practice. We have 29, 30 students in
I
our fifth grade
remember
class.
those times.
Yeah, I bet your wife remembers.
Yeah. So I'm just saying again, when you look at it as its entirety, that we are at levels that should create environments to where we're getting,
Good outcomes.
should be getting good outcomes. So, thank you.
I have a comment. So, we were saying that, excuse me, the Shiprock, their core classes, the average size, 18, 19, and did get a letter saying that there was a misrepresentation, that in one class, the average class load is 56 students.
Yes, so I think the one that you're referring to was the data that we use is the first semester, which Shiprock High School was in a 4-block schedule. But this semester, the start of the third quarter, which is the second semester, they switched to a modified block, which they have a 5-period intervention class. So that's kind of like there's a little difference of what we have reported, because we looked at our department looked at the true block, and then now they have the fifth hour, which we did not calculate for that report, because we reference it during when they use or utilize the true 4-block schedule. And we also looked at, and I can certainly see where they're coming from, but we looked at PowerSchool and what's registered in school enrollment. If they have changes in a certain, say for example, in between the second quarter and the third quarter, when students shift or create their schedule or move to other class, I think those are not being addressed or accounted for. But we have I don't know, I don't want to disagree with what was said, but we have a reference. We have a reference on what data we use for that matter. And I think if we can address that, because I think we received that letter really kind of like late in the discussion, where we added the number of enrollments for the first semester. As I said, the one that we had, and you know that Shiprock High School only used the true block schedule, the 4-block. So they have 4 classes or 4 blocks, but one of their blocks is their prep hour. So basically they're teaching 3 periods compared to other schools, Shiprock, Turtle Central, and Yukon High School. So students or teachers are there are more students during the day compared to the ones in Shiprock High School during those time, during the first semester.
Is this why we went to the block or change from that?
Yes, I think one of the reasoning that Mr. Carson actually shared is being equitable with resources that we have. And of course, when students move, from one school to another school, it will be really hard for that kid to adjust or to place them in courses that they currently in or previously in from that particular school. Say, from coming from Shiprock High School going to Newcomb High School, it will be a little bit challenging for them to place in a course where they previously was in.
Well, I think what was about a student from Newcomb could not find a math class suitable, but I think that was a real situation.
And numbers are the ones that we have presented in the FTE review this spring. So the numbers might not be, as I said, the number that you have is based on this first semester, and this one is the one that we have currently at the school, and the principals were the one to put those numbers in. And again, the formula, when they plug in the number of students in respective classes and then the number of teachers, then it came up with a ratio and then the average class size for each of the teachers in both courses. And if you multiply it to now 5 or 6, it will be really under the statutory requirements of 159 students or 160 students per day. Back in the day when I was teaching at Shiprock High School, I have 30 students per class, depending on what period, because most of they took it in the morning. But I remember we always have like 130, 140 students throughout the day to teach, which makes sense to me now why we did have that number before, because of the requirement. We are still under, but we're large. But compared now, as Mr. Montoya said, we should be like in the threshold of performing at expectations based on the number of students per class.
What happened to the split block?
I don't know, Mr. Carson and Mr. Deswood actually had more. I think they moved back to the regular, we're moving back to the regular scheduling for Shiprock High School.
Well, it's kind of we would never have known this, for the class size to be that large had it not been for this letter. And I don't know what else to say.
So the true requirement for a teacher at the high school is 150, with the exception of the ELA. And again, all the 3 high schools, especially Curry Prep, because Curry Prep is a alternative high school, they have way below the average class sizes or the required number of students to teach at each day.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to the next topic, the school board policy update. Jermaine,
What'd you do?
somewhere, she was here and then she wasn't.
Is it arm guard, what is it, arm guard?
Please
What's that?
raise your right hand.
Am I gonna get to host?
You know, it's like,
I do.
yeah.
Are we in policies?
Yes, we're on policies, letter T.
And you already used up 1 minute of your 3 minutes.
Board President, my understanding on this topic is that we wanted to circle back on the policy on board members attending conferences, also board member hats. And now we have, we did have some conversation earlier about beefing up our policies on cultural related practice. So which one would you like me to intro first?
Whichever's first on your list.
Just go.
Yeah.
I was gonna pull up the Albuquerque case that talks about House Bill 212, but I'm having really bad connection issues. I even tried getting on my hotspot and it's not helping, so.
I had the same problem too.
So I think I wouldn't mind starting there because that conversation kind of informs all of the conversations that we've sort of been having today. And so, and for a number of years, we've talked about wanting to have some conversation about the gray area between House Bill 212, the statutory board kind of duties and responsibilities, and where the superintendent lives, where the board members live, and then that gray area. And so, high level, the statute talks about, obviously budget, it talks about curriculum, it talks about program, even talks about instructional materials. And so, kind of at a 30,000 foot level, all the conversations we've been having today, FTEs, budget type conversations, the performance-based issues, from a programmatic standpoint, what's the goal of the board, all of those things fit in those statutory requirements. So House Bill 212, I think, gets misconstrued sometimes. Really, all House Bill 212 did was to say that boards could no longer directly hire and fire employees. In the past, if you guys remember, for those of you who were here before House Bill 212, boards literally hired and fired every single employee in the school district. And that became very political, and the legislature said, time out, we want to have kind of a separation. And so now what boards do is weigh in only on the appeal of a personnel matter that the superintendent has decided to the board. And so there's this kind of confusion about what is day-to-day and what are the things that are still important from a board perspective. And so that's kind of the backdrop to things that I understand board president wanted to speak about or to talk through. And one of those is conferences, how do we budget for conferences or board participation in conferences? And that becomes particularly concerning or even more important now because the legislature just last session increased the number of hours that board members have to have in terms of training, right? So kind of making it more formalized in the budget process so that the board actually has a budget to attend conferences. I think in years past, we borrow from different places depending on where the board wants to go. The other aspect of that is that each board member is
where we want to go, where we need to go.
right where you need to go. I agree with that language, and I apologize for the want, but where I was headed with that is each board member has a constituent base that they represent. So some folks, like there was some press from Gallup, for example, right, where one board member was saying, why do multiple board members have to go to different conferences? Well, one response to that is because each board member actually represents a constituent base, and not one board member necessarily can represent that whole constituent base. Plus, each board member potentially needs that training or that experience to be able to represent their constituency. So that's kind of that overall explanation. Board president, right now we have a very general policy that indicates the board can decide where board members want to go in terms of conferences, and it's pretty open-ended. But I understand you wanted to kind of revisit that. And with that, I bounce the ball back.
Any comments?
I thought she was addressing you.
I know, I don't have any comments.
Oh, I thought you wanted to specifically address potentially revising that policy. Or you just wanted to make it clear?
I did, I just want to bring it out into
Okay.
about that, the clarity. And then also, you brought up the budget and that we really should look at the budget for school board trainings. You made the point we had talked about, the number of training hours included, and then also we have been doing a lot of advocacy and other things for years now. So in order to support our continuous efforts to change federal funding and so forth, I think those things have to be looked at. I think it's never been, to my knowledge, ever been given and saying this is how much it is. So I think that's something we got to look at. Yes.
I think, and I don't know if there was a set amount and it's been exceeded, but I would certainly say that, especially in the last 4 years, what we've been dealing with regarding impact aid, especially at a national level, and the efforts that we undertook as it relates to that issue nationally, a lot of people not understanding, and quite frankly, the misconception of that funding with a lot of people across this country, where we were able to get in front of the National Congress of American Indians and in those educational sessions enlighten them of the challenges that we're having, and able to have them as a organization support our efforts are certainly worth that time and investment, because it affects all the kids, all these kids. And as we have said, and I have said before in the past, that funding is beneficial to all students. Prime example, if you remember President Haskell, when we were in, back then, Representative Lujan's office, and how I had stated to their representatives that that money is not just for the Navajo kids, but it benefits all the kids, even in Kirtland and throughout the other communities. So therefore, it's not just singular, but it certainly has its reach and its effect on all of our students. So by doing what we do and advocating what we do, especially at the national level, to be able to get more support is important. And one of the prime examples is some of the legislation that's going through in DC for full funding. And that effort is through NISA. And so it's important for our constituents to know that it's not just here in Santa Fe or here in these meetings that we talk about these things, but also nationally as well.
Yes.
And Board President, to add to that, I want to go back to something Vice President said earlier this morning, that we really are uniquely situated with what's going on in our community. And it reminds me of something that David Abbey told me when we were fighting to get 100% of our impact aid. And I asked him, I said, why have you allowed this to happen for so many years? And he literally said to me, he looked me straight in the face and he said, the squeaky wheel gets greased. And you guys weren't very squeaky. And I mean, he said it all over directly on that. But I think that point, so in addition to the training hours, when you have a board member, an elected official, sitting in an office in DC or at the state, for example, and the superintendent as well, but when you have that balance advocating for increased impact aid funding, we know that it's underfunded by $3 billion a year at least. And then with respect to JOM, for example, forward funding, so that the conversation we were having before early this morning, we can actually build programs that utilize those funds instead of trying to, do that all at the last minute. And then the third issue, where we now are looking at potentially advocating for mandatory Indian Ed funding up front rather than being part of discretionary funding. That means if we could accomplish that as a district, and the fact that folks are literally trying to compete for our impact aid dollars, other schools, we actually have a lot to fight for. Yeah. And so if you look at the, I'm going to tease performance-based budgeting, but if you look at the potential return you get out of budgeting for those events, the return you get could be multi-million dollars.
And I will certainly say we have a prime example of that over the past few years. $80 million. And that's a prime example of those efforts. So this lady to my left is absolutely certainly played a big part in that. She needed to do that, so that's the importance of it.
I agree. I guess if in part of that, we would have to look at the policies to see the restrictions. Know that there has to be a set amount, but it has to also include all these new efforts that we didn't really ask for. We just got kind of put into those positions.
And it shouldn't even be worded as a competition as far as impact aid. That's a treaty right.
It's responsibility. Yeah.
It's a responsibility, but unfortunately, that's the conversation at the national level.
We allow them to have that conversation by using words like that, but I think when we get up there, you need to say, nope.
And that's exactly right. So when we did advocate, we said we shouldn't be that there should be no competition. The pot should be expanded. And we did tie that to federal trust responsibility. The other issue that was mind-blowing to me was every single analyst on all of our delegations, Arizona and New Mexico, had never heard of the Kennedy Report, were completely ignorance a strong word, but yeah, I guess they were unaware of any of these issues. And that was shocking to me.
Mm-hmm. And we, Ms. Chappelle and I were in a conversation where we can ask for, what is it? Committee or Senate hearings or hearings on Indian education, so that would be something that is doable to see why nothing has changed since the Kennedy report and all these conversations we're here having today, the funding piece.
And then going back to who that benefits, if we can fix those issues, it benefits every student in our district, because then there are more funds to go around. And so it's not just that it only narrowly fixes, this certain population, but just like Impact Aid, when you have those additional dollars coming in, it literally supports efforts for the whole district. So the other policy I believe you wanted to kind of dive into, Board President, was the statute and policy that, the board can only act in its official capacity as a board, and versus kind of talking through what hat you wear when you're an elected official but not sitting in a board meeting, for example. And that kind of, how do you have those conversations? How do you conduct yourself? We did a number of years ago put in place a board, I don't remember what we called it, a policy where if, folks were not in line with policy or whatnot, you would have a conversation with them, kind of get them on track, and then if they were still, not in line with board policy or statute, then you would have a potential censure conversation. And so there was that process put in place, I want to say 5-ish years ago. And so I know you wanted to have that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. I think as board members, even in regards to a recent situation, I was at a chapter meeting, and one of my constituents, there was an issue at one of the schools, and there was a situation, and I almost volunteered myself to attend the meeting and put myself in that situation to attend this meeting with the parent. And then at the last second, I stepped back and decided not to. And in the conversation, and that's where I was talking to Ms. Chappelle, is that even as board members, even when we're not wearing the board member hat here in the meeting and we're out in the community, we still have a certain, not power, but there's undue influence that we have.
Perception
And
of authority.
oh, yes, and we have to remember our role. And even when those things, I'm going to say opportunities, but those situation arises, just as a reminder to the board members, try not to, I guess, muddy the waters in that sense. We have to remember our place. We have to remember that we are elected officials, but we also don't wanna take advantage of the hats that we wear, and even unknowingly, we do have, potentially, we can sway. So there is, always that at risk. So as a reminder to remember our place, our situation, and at the end of the day, how does it benefit the children? We're here as elected officials to help the children, the students, to help them navigate the world in the future, and how does that help us as a whole? So that is my piece, and I know that unintentionally things happen, but I really am looking at those things. I am really aware. Things get brought to my attention, and before censuring or doing anything like that, I want to have that out in the open to say this is the standard, this is the expectation, as a reminder to all board members, including myself, put in that situation, that we have to remember what our job is, what our role is, and not to interfere with the operation of school, and to remember that we are here ultimately for the students, and we are elected officials, and we have to act in that capacity. That's it. Was there another one?
The only other thing that you had raised with me, Board President, that you wanted to kind of talk through was, the notion that sometimes board members wear two hats.
Oh, yes. And that we have to recuse ourselves if there's interference. So when you're here, and I say that myself, that we have to remind ourselves and remember that if things are, if there's a conflict of interest, to always recuse yourself. Somebody else can make that decision, but to remember our roles. Again, it comes back to the roles, and it really is in the best interest for the students to be able to recognize that you could be a conflict of interest, and to be able to recuse yourself from. I think all of us have good judgment that we are able to do that. But this is just a reminder to remember that recuse yourself if there's a conflict of interest, and that we have a job to do.
And typically, it's a disclosure and potential recusal, right? So the conversation is the most important aspect of that, is saying, I think I might, in the hat, we'll use our board president since she volunteered herself, in the hat of JOM director for Doty, I do XYZ. So in potential context of something that comes in front of the school board on a JOM issue, let's have that conversation about potential conflict to determine if you have to recuse.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily that you have to recuse every single time. It's just to daylight the potential and then figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Question
Yes.
regarding that example, does it say perception of conflict?
Typically, so when you're looking at the fiduciary or the duty of a board member to the statutory rule, the statutory duties of that board, right? And then the other hat. If it's a perception, the law doesn't say you have to, recuse if it's a perception. It really needs to be actual conflict, not just perception. Now, there could be a situation where it's such a huge perception you can't really get around it, and it causes lots of controversy, then you determine what you balance it. Unfortunately, there's no black or white
So does the
answer.
law delineate between huge perception and minimal perception?
No, it balances, it's a balancer.
I'm just saying. They offered me an opportunity to ask the question, so. And I only say that because in light of the
You're just
first,
wanting to make us all wake up.
excuse me?
You just want us to wake up.
Oh, in light of the first part of the conversation about the hats. And I go back to constantly we're told, and there's a counsel from one of the school districts who's constantly saying that how you have no authority, you are nobody when you are by yourself. There is no power, there is no authority in you until you sit on that board. But just looking at your reaction, I get what you're saying, and I understand that. And again, to the point of the use of the word perception. See?
Okay, so I can go back to tease that out a little. The perception, and I think that board president hit on this, literally give you influence even though you're not all sitting up here together.
Oh, yeah.
And so if that's what we're throwing into the perception equation, then yeah, I would say you need to be careful and mindful of the influence you carry. With the example that board president just gave, her first reaction was, I want to help, right? And then she said, hold on a second, what perception is that going to give in terms of that being resolved through the rule, how we go through our chain of command to resolve these issues? Is her presence there going to create some type of influence that changes how that should have gone? And the answer, and you have to obviously, balance that out. Every situation's not going to be the same, but the thought process here is to have that conversation of ahead of time. What hat are you wearing? By participating in whatever issue that is, what potential influences or changes are you making to that process?
So could that also include that one's free speech rights does not end once they raise that hand? The right hand?
It could include that, and I'm definitely not here to debate that aspect of it, but that's why it is a balancing act, and you have to really weigh all of that together. That some of these issues are complicated, and you literally can't prejudge them. You have to go through that analysis every single time, in my opinion, and in my experience. And I've worked with boards literally since law school, so 20 plus years.
Just so as with Garcetti and free speech rights, even the Supreme Court is still not saying that as well.
Right, and sometimes elected officials don't always, they have there's a different analysis for elected officials on some of that. Because, and board members, quite frankly, you take on responsibilities. And so, again, it's not black or white.
So
And
it's
then-
so it's subjective depending on which judge you're sitting in front of or which jury you're sitting in front of.
Well, that's a whole nother issue. But even if you had just an absolute objective judge, the law itself is not clear, and you have to balance issues. It's perfect. I think it's perfect. Maybe you're right under a. But they are tough issues, and the best way, in my experience, the best way to deal with those issues is to just talk them through. 9 times out of 10, there's no bad intent there. And if you have that conversation, you can kind of see that. But for example, free speech, or even libel and that kind of thing with political officials, it's not the same analysis, right? So, I mean, we're opening up a can of worms that we could probably spend a whole day talking about stuff like this in that context. But I think the intent of the conversation was just a gentle reminder of let's all think through that process and those hats and have those tough conversations.
My point of asking the question is the perspective, many different perspectives. And to your point, to add to that is to say that it just depends on context.
It can depend on context and a bunch of other stuff. So, with that, I have my notes on what you want to accomplish with those other policies. I think we're out executive.
Okay, now we have executive session. So I think we will stay in here. No? Yeah. We'll stay in here.
read it? That's my motion.
Okay. All right, number 3, executive session, board members, I would to take have a motion to convene an executive session, and then I will do a roll call vote if I get the motion.
Read it first.
First, read this whole thing, okay?
Yeah.
Convene an executive session discussion on personnel matters regarding the board's goals and expectations of the superintendent as permitted under NMSA 1978, section 10-15-1, H2 of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act, and discussion of participation in threatened or actual litigation pertaining to the Zoom lawsuit, and state of New Mexico educational funding concerns as permitted under the NMSA 1978, section 10-15-1, H7 of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act.
I'll make a motion to convene to executive session.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Vice President Vasquez, how do you vote?
Yes.
Secretary Wells, how do you vote?
Yes.
Board member?
Yes.
You vote yes.
Mr. So still online, or did you jump off?
Board member So, are you online? Okay. It's just
Funny as
after all day. All right, we are in executive session. We will have it here with to include superintendent and Ms. Chappelle. Appreciate your input, dialogue, discussion.
Thank you all.
Everybody. Thank you.
You're saying goodbye.
Good night.
Yeah, thank you so much.